Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much to each of you for being here today. Ms. Haines, I want to come to you. We've talked a lot about Ukraine and Russia this morning and appreciate your frankness in this. But let me ask you about Wagner and the proxies and what you're seeing not only in Ukraine, but also what you're seeing when it comes to Libya, into other areas, in the aggressiveness of the use of the proxies.
Thank you, Senator. We can probably go into more detail in closed session,
okay.
but I could just say more generally that we do see Wagner being used, in effect, in Ukraine. We see that that's
and how about
that
Africa?
Yes, absolutely. Wagner has been historically present in Africa, and it's a more recent event, obviously, in the current crisis that Russia deployed them effectively in Ukraine.
Okay. All right. General Berrier, do you have anything you want to add on that?
We, Senator, we track ISIS in Africa, Syria, other places. I think we'll get into a richer discussion on the closed session about ISIS, or excuse me, Wagner operations in Ukraine. Sorry.
Okay. That is helpful. Let me ask you also, and by the way, thank you for the China map. I will say this, I think we could have a picture of the globe and say that is where China is seeking to be aggressive. It is something that is not lost on me, that they are anxious right now to expand their reach. But let's talk about DIA and how is the DIA collaborating with our allies and our partners to counter Beijing's cyber espionage operations?
Senator, we're closely collaborating with our Five Eyes partners, in this case, our Australian and New Zealand partners, on this very issue, along with our partners over at the National Security Agency with General Nakasone. There is a concerted effort by the Five Eyes to understand these activities in cyberspace emanating from China. So we're working that very, very closely. We can provide more details in a close session.
And can you provide us with some of the lessons learned from the Russia-Ukraine conflict that helped to inform some of this work?
Cyber activity?
Yes, sir.
So I think the key there would be information operations and disinformation operations and their level of effectiveness on the Russian side, or ineffectiveness on the Russian side, and then looking at the level of effectiveness on the Ukrainian side. When I compare and contrast information operations, I think the Ukrainians have been much more successful in the information operations in space. Russians have had some success with cyber activities in the Ukraine, and I think the PRC and she are looking at all of that as they sort of unwind this conflict and learn the lessons from that.
And Ms. Haines, how is the intel community utilizing AI and machine learning as they look at applications, look at how Beijing is continuing to move forward? So how are you preferencing some of the new technologies that can help us in this effort?
Thank you, Senator. So we are using artificial intelligence and, in particular, machine learning across the board for our mission set. And just to give you an example of the kind of things that we're able to do with it, I think it has been extraordinary in terms of helping us with analysis, being able to focus in on certain data sets that we're able to effectively manipulate more easily and without as many human resources effectively to identify patterns. We're able to use that then, have analysts that are educated and experts take that information and use it in their analysis in different ways. We have something called an artificial intelligence unity project that is really looking across the intelligence community at different applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then trying to leverage those so that we can actually allow other elements to build off of the work that's being done by, another element that they might not have thought of before, and also doing it at sort of a cheaper cost and so on. So there's a variety of ways in which we're doing it. It's hard to talk about it in an unclassified way, but we're certainly, this is a major area of effort and investment, and we can provide you with further
Thank you.
details if that's useful.
My time has expired. I will come to you for a written response on the recent article that quoted a senior intel source saying they're about referencing the uptick in al-Shabaab activity. So thank you very much.
On behalf of the chair, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Senator King. So it's paramount to our national security that we keep our most sensitive secrets properly protected and classified, particularly when protecting sources and methods. But I am very concerned about the levels of overclassification and pseudo-classification that we're seeing across the federal government. Everyone understands the need to protect information about our most sensitive capabilities from our enemies, but our classification system has spiraled out of control when it means, for example, that our own four-star generals can't share information with their fellow three-stars. It is hard to see how that level of classification is making America safer. So overclassification also reduces public scrutiny of important issues, and it can hamper accountability. Director Haines, you lead the intelligence community. You have years of experience in these matters. Do you think that overclassification is a national security problem?
I do, Senator. I've stated this explicitly. I do think it's a challenge. As long as I've been in government, frankly, there have been blue ribbon commissions that have looked at this, have said there's significant overclassification. This is a challenge, as you indicate, from a democratic perspective, but it's also a challenge from a national security perspective, because if we can't share information as easily as we might otherwise be if it were appropriately classified, then that obviously affects our capacity to work on these issues. It's a very challenging issue, as I know you know well. In other words, it is, there are technical aspects to it, there are cultural aspects.
So let's talk about that just a little bit. And I want to say, I agree with you that overclassification has been a problem across administrations. The Obama administration put out 2 different executive orders aimed at improving classification and information sharing, but that was more than a decade ago, and obviously the problem persists. So let me ask this a different way. Director Haines, would you support the administration releasing a new executive order on classification practices to ensure that we are protecting national security information while keeping our commitments to open government?
Without knowing exactly what it would say, it's sort of hard for me to say I would support an executive order on that subject. I mean, I think I am constantly looking for additional ways in which we might try to help address this issue, and we have a number of ways that we're investing in the intelligence community on these issues. But I
appreciate that, and I'm not asking you to sign a blank
fair
check
enough.
here, but you're the president's principal advisor on intelligence matters, and I'm just asking if you would be supportive if the president wanted to take that step.
Well, I am supportive of what the president wants to take as steps within his authority and appropriate policy to do. So yes, in that sense, I would be.
Okay, so let me ask this then from one more perspective, and that is during the Ukraine crisis. We have seen that a well-functioning declassification system can be incredibly powerful. The work by the Biden administration to expose what the Intelligence Committee knew about Putin's plans seriously hurt Russia's credibility, and it strengthened our response to an illegal and immoral war. My understanding is that it took reshuffling of resources to make that happen, and I applaud that, but we need more of it. The most recent numbers that I've seen is that we spend $18 billion protecting the classification system, and only about $102 million, do the math fast in your head, about 5% of that number, on declassification efforts. And that ratio feels off in a democracy. So with that in mind, Director Haines, are there any lessons learned from Ukraine about how we can expedite declassification when there's a compelling reason to do so?
I think there are lessons to be learned from Ukraine, and it will be easier to talk about this in closed session, but I think there's some value that we could discuss in closed session on those issues. And I do think it has helped to help other people understand the value of ensuring that we are classifying things at the appropriate level and how declassification can support foreign policy in different ways. So I think that's all to the good.
Good. You know, in a democracy, we have a duty to be accountable to the public. And when we keep secrets from Americans, there needs to be a compelling public interest in doing so. And in too many cases, it seems that public officials err on the side of secrecy because the information could be embarrassing, or even worse, just because it's easier not to be accountable to the American people. So I urge all of our agencies to address this problem, and I look forward to working with you on it. Thank you.
On behalf of the chairman, Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning. Director Haines, in your best assessment, does Russia intelligence closely monitor our Secretary of Defense?
I think Russian intelligence tries very closely to monitor all of our senior leaders.
Yeah, thank you. So you believe that noted that when he or said that Russia weakened and that the U.S. will move heaven and earth to arm Ukraine, do you believe that's right? He should say that?
Yes, I think the Secretary of Defense should say
Do
what
you
he
believe
thinks.
Russia blames the U.S. intelligence community for helping Ukraine shoot down a Russian plane carrying hundreds of people?
I'm sorry, sir. Can you repeat the question?
Do you believe Russia blames us, our intelligence agency, for Ukraine shooting down a plane with hundreds of troops on board? Do you think Russia blames us for that?
Which plane are you thinking of?
There was a plane recently that was shot down, Russian plane, that 100 troops. Do you believe that they blame our intelligence agency for that?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. Do you believe that Russia blames our U.S. intelligence for sinking their flagship, Moskova? Do you think they blame us for that?
I don't know, sir. We haven't seen any direct report.
To what extent do you access that Russia believes it is at war with the West and the United States? Do you think that they believe they're at war with us?
Russia has historically believed that they are in a conflict, in effect, with NATO and the United States on a variety of issues, including in cyber and so on.
So you believe that they're fighting us, that they're fighting us as well as they're fighting Ukraine, correct?
In a sense, their
Yeah.
perception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're arming them and we're talking. Okay. General Berrier, does the United States or Ukraine have air superiority over the war zone? Which one has air superiority?
I would call it, Senator, I would call that an air standoff right now. I mean, the Russians can fly tactical aircraft over the line of troops in the local area, but they cannot expand into western parts of Ukraine without coming under an air threat.
But Ukraine is more than we are, the United States, obviously, because we're not we're not in their airspace.
No, we're not involved.
Would you say that Russia possesses strong air defenses?
I think the Russians have very credible air defense systems.
Does Ukraine have any countermeasures to thwart Russia artillery, rockets, and long range? Does Ukraine have any air defenses?
Ukraine has air defenses. They also have counter-battery radars that allow them to defend themselves from incoming artillery, or at least see it.
Would you agree that anyone in Ukraine right now is under serious threat? Obviously, they are,
I would
correct?
agree they are, yes.
Okay. In the past 2 weeks, we've seen several high-profile visitors take trips to active war zone, our Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Speaker of the House, First Lady, and this is for both of you. What is our intelligence community doing to lessen the risk of a high-ranking official? How are we protecting these people going to Ukraine? Our people going to Ukraine? I mean,
Senator, I think that would be a discussion for the closed session.
okay. So we could guarantee that the First Lady was safe when she went to Ukraine. We could guarantee that 100%, correct? Both of you. I'm just asking.
I would not say that, no. I would not say
Thank
that.
you. Is it your best advice that we don't go to Ukraine right now? Any of us in here?
Senator, I wouldn't say that. I would say with proper planning and coordination that it's possible.
General, 100%. 100%. Can we guarantee going into a war zone that our Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State went on a train?
Senator, I don't think we can ever guarantee anything 100%.
Thank you. Well, that's kind of the point I'm making. You know, we're kind of poking the bear here, saying, you know, we're bragging about it. And even President Biden said today, wait a minute, you know, we got to cut back on this pointing that, you know, how many generals have been killed and we're part of it. I totally agree with that. I totally agree that, hey, we want to help Ukraine. Obviously, we all do. But we do not want to take that step forward to where we get a lot of our men and women involved in this. And it looks like to me that we're taking way too many chances of sending people over there for a photo op other than doing the right things, which we are doing. But we just don't need to step over that path. And you know, thank you for what you're doing. But I think all of us need to look at that point of, hey, there's a point of no return here if we cross that line. And if we were on the other side, the same way, and we had somebody helping, we had a plane shot down, a ship sank, and then bragging about killing generals, as Senator Cotton said, you know, we're walking a tightrope here. And that's just the only point I want to bring up. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the chair, Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Haines, again, looking at your office's 2022 annual threat assessment, it's clear there's a lot going on in the world right now, and I understand that resources are finite and trade-offs often have to be made. That is in, I think, a large part what makes your job very challenging. You know, clearly the situation in Ukraine is taking up a lot of bandwidth right now, and I would presume that Indo-PACOM requires a significant amount of resources as well to fully understand the threat environment. And, you know, these two things are obviously related. But what about some other regions in the world? In light of the worldwide threats you have articulated here today, do you feel the intelligence community has the necessary resources in place to confidently understand the threat environment in other places such as Afghanistan, northern Syria, Pakistan, and Iran?
Thank you, Senator. I mean, I think, you know, like all good bureaucrats, that we could spend more money on these issues. There's no question. I mean, I think certainly that's true. But we are doing our very best, as you indicate, to ensure that we're not taking our eye off the ball, essentially across the globe, on issues that are also of critical importance among the ones that you've identified.
All right, thank you. I want to ask you a specific question about the MQ-9, the Reaper drones. So the Air Force has been reluctant to invest in upgrading the platform and proposes to retire it potentially like in 2035, even as the demand from combat commanders for the system remains high. You know, their argument, you know, has been that the platform's not survivable in a China-Russia scenario. I think it's pretty clear that it would be survivable in a Russian scenario now. Do you have an opinion on the continued utility of reconnaissance platforms such as the MQ-9, particularly as we face increased activity in the so-called gray zone below the threshold of armed combat?
Yeah. Oh,
Oh,
go
no,
ahead.
go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Senator,
Go ahead, Jim.
I have been the beneficiary of MQ-9 operations for the last 20 years. It's an outstanding platform. It's done great things. With increasing threats emanating from China, their ability to reach out and touch those kinds of things, I totally understand why the Air Force wants to divest of that platform. The efficacy of that in the coming years in low-intensity conflict, counterterrorism operations, it'll always be useful in a low air defense kind of environment. but in a high-end environment, I don't think it's very survivable.
But we have, looked at the, Russian surface-to-air missile threat environment as, high-end. Turns out, like a lot of things, day one of the war is much different than day 60 or 90 or 180 of any conflict. So I'm concerned that not only this platform, but sometimes we look at divesting, from platforms that could provide incredible utility, further along in the timeline. General, I got another question for you here in my last minute. Any satellite, a ban on ASAT testing. The administration recently announced this. It's a policy I agree with. Russia, China, they do not, share this goal, nor do they abide by any kind of similar policy. The Russians and the Chinese both over the last about decade and a half have performed ASAT tests. The Russians more recently. The DIA's 2022 report on challenges to security in space lists orbital debris as a significant challenge to space operations and concluded that the debris endangers spacecraft of all nations in low Earth orbit, including astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the ISS, but also China has a space station as well. Given the fact that both the Russians and Chinese conduct manned space operations, what would be your assessment as to why they continue to put their people in harm's way by conducting these dangerous tests?
Senator, I think they value that capability in space as an asymmetric advantage over our superior technology and continue to pursue those kinds of capabilities. Whether or not they would actually use it is another discussion.
Do you expect them to do more anti-satellite tests?
We have not seen evidence that they plan in the near future of doing more, but I would expect as they go through their development processes, they will do more tests.
All right, thank you, General, and thank you, Director Haines.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking both of you for your continued service to our country. Director Haines, in April, Secretary Blinken told Congress that Iran's attempts to assassinate former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were real and ongoing. And this month, Israeli press reported that an agent for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force was thwarted from an assassination attempt on a U.S. general in Germany. Why is Iran apparently so emboldened right now, and how can the intelligence community and national security communities at large change this dangerous trend and deter Iran from these malicious actions?
Thank you, Senator. So I think we should probably pick this up in closed session. What I think I can say just in open session is a fair amount of their motivation in this scenario we assess to be in relation to Soleimani as part of their sort of efforts for revenge, and is a particularly challenging area, I think, to deter them from action in this space. But we can discuss what more specifics, I think, in closed session. Thank you, sir.
Very well. Director Haines, once again, the crisis at the United States southern border has literally exploded under this administration and continues to deteriorate. Reuters reported that U.S. officials at the Department of Homeland Security are preparing for as high as 9,000 arrests per day. Now, as the economic and political conditions in Latin America continue to spark waves of migration that put pressure on our southern border, how serious does the intelligence community see this as a threat to our country? And also, how and to what degree is the intelligence community shifting resources to address the surge at our southern border?
Thank you, Senator. So we have stood up a migrant crisis cell, which is essentially a cell that helps to bring together intelligence from across the community to support DHS's efforts. And it's really looking south of the border at effectively migrant movements that may be coming towards the southern border so that we can help them to prepare, in effect, for encounters on the border.
Are you in agreement with the assessment that there could be as many as 9,000 arrests a day? Is that an assessment that you would concur with?
Sir, I don't look at those particular questions. That is within the Department of Homeland Security.
I'm just curious because when you're doing your planning to determine what your needs are, clearly, in order for you to do the planning, you've got to have an assessment of what the expected flow would be. I'm just curious if, it's not meant as a gotcha question.
No, of course. So we don't assess our needs along the border because we don't actually have needs along the border. In other words, that's sort of the DHS role, is to figure out how can we plan for the number of incidents or encounters that they'll have on the border. And for us, what we're trying to do is understand what are the drivers, what are the ultimate flows that are likely to occur, and we try to set up intelligence so that we can actually provide some indication warning of here is where you're likely to see an increase in the flow, either south or north, or how it is, and where it's coming from ultimately. Does that make sense? I don't, yeah.
It does. It just catches me a little bit by surprise that in your planning, that most certainly you have to have a good communication with Homeland Security. I'm assuming there's a good communication there.
Of course.
And that based upon what their needs are is really what you're doing is providing them with additional resources. And you're also, at the same time, gathering intel based on the possibility, the strong possibility that individuals would try to come in through the southern border. And based upon that, I was just curious, and I know that we're in a public discussion, but nonetheless, I think it's something that's been talked about publicly, and the fact that we've got folks from all over the world that are using that as an entryway into the United States, and most certainly you're aware of that.
Absolutely. No, I'm not trying to sort of duck the question or anything. I think we see a very high flow. There's no question. What happens is the Department of Homeland Security, we have somebody who's a liaison that sits within their sort of spaces that tells us here are the requirements, and they basically are looking for indications and warning of, you're likely to see a flow along this part of the border, that sort of thing, as opposed to us being able to help them determine, okay, today you're going to see X number of people coming through the southern border as a whole.
Thank you. Just one other quick question here. The intelligence community and Congress are working to flesh out the Foreign Malign Influence Center's mission, the budget, and size, among other issues. But with the 2022 midterms almost here, we're probably behind the curve a little bit. What are the major roadblocks stopping the IC from standing up this intelligence center?
So we've just gotten appropriations basically through the FY22 budget, which has been great, and we're currently building up the Foreign Malign Influence Center. We already had the election threat executive, so we've been doing work on what the threats might be to our elections. That is now pulled into the Foreign Malign Influence Center, and we effectively have the budget for up to 12 people in the Foreign Malign Influence Center under this context, and we've asked for funding for FY23, essentially to be able to expand it by about 3 people, but also to allow us to access expertise and knowledge that we think is critical, and really just to help facilitate what the community is doing across the board on these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses. I want to ask about 2 items. The first is undersea cables. 95% of global communication rely on a robust undersea cable network, 500,000 miles across the seafloor globally. Internet, global banking transactions, the SWIFT system, diplomatic cables, encrypted military communications are a few of the myriad applications that rely on this network. 2 NATO commands, the Joint Support and Enabling Command in Ulm, Germany, and Joint Force Command in Norfolk, are monitoring threats against undersea cables in the Atlantic, but the vast majority of these cables are controlled by private sector companies. In the U.S., France, Spain, Japan, China, these contractors, companies and contractors who work with them, such as Google and Amazon, oversee the planning, production, design, deployment, and maintenance of the cables. To what extent is the DoD and IC looking at integrating and communicating with these private actors so that we can monitor threats to the cables?
Senator, I'm going to take that one for action, do a little homework to get you a fulsome answer.
And I would like additionally to know whether China, Russia, or other malign actors have an organic capability to map our networks, to cut into or tap into them, to listen to military or other government communications. So I would like a response back to that. Here's my second question. Unless, Director Haines, unless you have something to offer on the undersea cable.
Thank you, sir. I actually, I'd love to do it in closed session if that's all right.
I'll look forward to that.
Okay.
Now a question about our intelligence estimates of the strength of other militaries. I think there were a number of estimates that the Afghan military would perform much better than they did. And there were a number of estimates that the Russian military was much stronger than it is proven to be. So what are we doing to assess why we overestimated the strength of both of those militaries and recalibrating the way we assess military strength of other nations?
Senator, I'll start. We're taking a holistic view of how we do analysis and evaluate foreign militaries. You know, it starts with the relationships that we have with our foreign partners, understanding their militaries, understanding their understanding of adversary militaries, and working an all-source assessment to have granularity inside the capabilities of these militaries. Certainly the ANDSF was an issue. Certainly the Russian overestimation of Russian capability was an issue. But if you back up, if you look at Russia's growth since the early 2000s, their war in Chechnya, their war in Georgia, what they did in Ukraine, their operations in Syria, and you understand the reforms that they went through, we saw that from the outside. What we did not see from the inside was sort of this hollow force, lack of NCO corps, lack of leadership training, lack of effective doctrine. So those are the intangibles that we've got to be able to get our arms around as an intelligence community to really understand.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Wicker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Berrier, let me quote from your prepared statement. Beijing appears willing to defer the use of military force as long as it considers that unification with Taiwan can be negotiated and that the cost of conflict outweigh the benefits. General Berrier, I believe the United States should prepare Taiwan and send a clear message to Beijing that a military invasion would be too costly. I also believe the primary objective of the United States and its allies with regard to Taiwan should not be so much to repel a Chinese attack, but to prevent it from ever occurring. So, General, from your assessment of China's capabilities and timeline, as well as Taiwan's current defensive posture, what needs to be done? What can the United States be doing for or supplying to Taiwan in order to prevent a Chinese attack from ever occurring?
Senator, thank you for that question. First, I would say that I believe the PRC would rather not do it by force. I think they would rather do this peacefully over time. There are some things that we can do with Taiwan. I think they're learning some very interesting lessons from the Ukrainian conflict, like how important leadership is, how important small unit tactics are, how important an NCO corps is, and really effective training with the right weapon systems and what those systems with the right people would be able to do to thwart that. So I think we have to engage with our Indo-PACOM partners within the Department of Defense, the Taiwan military and leadership to help them understand what this conflict has been about, what lessons they can learn, and where they should be focusing their dollars on defense and their training.
Is there NCO corps where it should be at this point?
They have a largely conscript force. I don't believe it is where it should be.
And so the volunteer part of their armed forces, is that where it should be, the non-conscript?
They have a very short enlistment period. I can provide you additional details in a written response.
Okay. You also have written that the PLA Navy is the largest Navy in the world and has the capability to conduct long-range precision strikes against land targets from its submarine and surface combatants. You later have written that Russia is fielding its new, quote, ultra-quiet submarine capable of threatening North America from the Pacific Ocean. General, do you assess that China and Russia will continue to grow both of their naval fleets and invest in new capabilities?
Yes, I do believe they will both invest in new capabilities and grow their fleets.
And is the United States on pace to build and commission as many ships as China is building?
I would refer that question to the Secretary of Navy and Chief of Naval Operations.
But surely the intelligence community has an assessment of that.
DIA has an assessment of Russian naval capabilities and Chinese PLAN capabilities.
And DIA is familiar with what the plans of the public plans of the Navy are at this point.
Broadly, but I think that the Navy will make those investment decisions based on how they perceive the threat as well, and we'll certainly collaborate with our partners in the Navy on any of that.
Let me switch to Afghanistan. Director Haines, you submitted the 2022 Office of Director of National Intelligence annual threat assessment on Afghanistan. The report says that the Taliban takeover threatens U.S. interest, that 500,000 Afghan refugees could attempt to cross into surrounding countries, and almost certainly terrorist groups will establish and expand safe havens from which to plot attacks. So, Madam Director, given these assessments in your office's annual threat assessment, would you assess that the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan has left the homeland more susceptible to terrorist attacks?
Thank you, Senator. I agreed with what General Berrier indicated earlier on about the threat, essentially, that we're seeing from al-Qaeda and from ISIS-K, which is to say that we see ISIS-K as the more concerning threat. At this point, we do not assess that they currently have the capability to sexually affect external attacks directed from Afghanistan to the United States at this stage, but they could build that capability over time, and they certainly have the intent to do so. With al-Qaeda, we are not seeing as much of a threat, and that doesn't mean that it couldn't grow over time, and that's obviously something that we're monitoring during this period.
General Berrier, has the exit from Afghanistan left our homeland more vulnerable?
Senator, I would say not more vulnerable, but this is certainly an issue that the intelligence community has to keep on the warm plate, if you will, to make sure that we can monitor those networks, what they're doing, and where they're migrating to.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much, Senator Wicker. Senator King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Director, I'm concerned about the leaks last week of the fact that the details of intelligence that's being shared with the Ukrainians, both in terms of sources and methods, alerting the Russians what we know, perhaps how we know it, and also feeding Vladimir Putin's paranoia about conflict with the West. Are you actively pursuing the source of those leaks from last week?
Thank you, Senator. We obviously always actively pursue any information that we have that indicates that anybody may be disclosing classified information, without authorization.
Well, I hope you will pursue that, because I think sometimes leaks are embarrassing. We don't worry too much about them, but I think in this case they were harmful, and I hope that this will be an active investigation. A question to both of you. We all believe that the intelligence community did a really excellent job of predicting the invasion, alerting the world as to what was going on, what the disposition of Russian troops were, the involvement of Belarus, all of that. What we missed was the will to fight of the Ukrainians and the leadership of Vladimir Zelensky. And we also missed that in Afghanistan. Within 12 months, we missed the will to fight. We overestimated the Afghans' will to fight, underestimated the Ukrainians' will to fight. I realize will to fight is a lot harder to assess than number of tanks or, volume of ammunition or something. But I hope that the intelligence community is doing some soul searching about how to better get a handle on that question, because we had testimony in this committee and in the Intelligence Committee that Kyiv was going to fall in 3 or 4 days and the war would last 2 weeks.
and that turned out to be grossly wrong. Is this, are you looking at this question of how to assess will to fight and domestic leadership?
Yes, Senator, you heard from General Berrier, obviously, a number of things that DIA is doing. For the intelligence community writ large, we have a process at the National Intelligence Council taking a look at these issues. It is, I would say that it's a combination of will to fight and capacity, in effect, and the two of them are issues that are, as you indicated, quite challenging to, provide effective analysis on, and we're looking at different methodologies for doing so and trying to get
Berrier,
some
this is
insight,
this is your lane, assessing military capability, and a big part, as you testified earlier, the reason the Ukrainian war is going the way it is that the Ukrainians are fighting for their land and the Russians don't have the same will to fight. I hope that this is something you're focused upon because, again, I think we failed on this question in Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, we had testimony over and over that the government would last 6 months or a year beyond the departure of U.S. troops. It lasted -2 weeks. Is this something that you're focused upon?
Senator, I am focused on it, and I really appreciate this dialogue because I think there's an important nuance that we have to discuss. One is the will to fight, and the other is the capacity to fight. So in closed briefings, we talked about this capacity to fight, and given the correlation of forces that the Russians had and what the Ukrainians had, it was the thought of senior analysts that it wasn't going to go very well for a variety of factors. But there was never an intelligence community assessment that said the Ukrainians lacked the will to fight. Those assessments talked about their capacity.
Yeah, but there wasn't an
to
assessment
fight.
that they did either. The assessment was Ukraine would be overrun in a matter of weeks. That was grossly wrong.
Grossly wrong, but not a question of will to fight. It was capacity at that time, as the DNI just said. So we are taking a look at that.
Are you saying the
of that.
Ukrainians' will to fight hasn't been an important part of this struggle?
No, I'm not saying that. I think it's been everything.
And that's what we didn't know, correct?
Well, we assessed their capacity to face the size of the Russian forces that were amassed on their border was going to be very difficult for them.
Well, all I'm saying is the intelligence community needs to do a better job on this issue.
I think the intelligence community did a great job on this issue, Senator, and we will.
General, how can you possibly say that when we were told explicitly Kyiv would fall in 3 days and the Ukraine would fall in 2 weeks? You're telling me that was accurate intelligence?
So we were really focused on the Russian forces at the time, and so when we backed this
up, we were
up,
wrong about that too, weren't we? We overestimated the Russians.
Well, the intelligence community did a great job in predicting and talking through the timeline
and I acknowledge
and
that
how
at
the
the
Russians
beginning
will
of my
do that.
question. I understand that. Yes, they did. What they failed at was predicting what was going to happen after Russia invaded.
So as I look at the totality of the entire operation, I think the enormity rests on the predictions of what the Russians were going to do versus whether or not the Ukrainians were going to be successful.
Well, if you don't concede there was a problem on this, then we've got a problem.
Senator, I didn't say that. We are going to take a hard look at this, but I think in the totality of the entire operation, there were a lot more successes than failures.
I won't argue that point. I'm just trying to make a point that I think there was a major issue that we missed that had a significant influence on how this has unfolded. And had we had a better handle on the prediction, we could have done more to assist the Ukrainians earlier. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Haines, General, is it your sense that Beijing thinks that it has a window of opportunity to invade Taiwan before Taiwan and the United States modernize and get into better position to deter any such invasion? Let's start with you, Director.
So, thank you, Senator. It's our view that they are working hard to effectively put themselves into a position in which their military is capable of taking Taiwan over our intervention, right? We can talk in closed sessions about timelines and so on for how quickly they think they may be able to achieve that, but I think that is something that they are trying to achieve, even as what General Berrier stated earlier is true, which is to say that they would prefer not to have to use military force to take Taiwan. They'd prefer to use other means.
General, do you want to comment on this?
Well, I know there are a lot of dates out there, Senator, 2027, 2030, 2049. Certainly, it's on their mind. We're not really sure what lessons Xi Jinping is taking away from this conflict right now. We would hope that they would be the right ones, but I think it's going to take some time to sort out whether or not he believes this is a window or that his timeline would extend.
Let me ask you about something that Admiral Davidson said when he was commander of PACOM. He told the committee last March that he worried about a Chinese invasion of Taiwan in the next 6 years. That's his testimony. His successor, Admiral Aquilino, has similarly said that he views the timeline to be shrinking. Based on the indicators, Director, let me start with you on this. Based on the indicators available to the intelligence community, do you agree that the threat to Taiwan is acute between now and 2030?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that it's critical or acute between now and 2030. I think that's absolutely fair. What is hard to tell is how, for example, whatever lessons China learns coming out of the Russia-Ukraine crisis might affect that timeline, as well as you indicated, whether or not our capabilities, Taiwan's capabilities, other decisions that will have to be made between now and then that will affect the timeline.
General, you said just a second ago that you hope China would learn some lessons from the Ukraine conflict. What is it you're hoping that they take away?
Just how difficult like a cross-strait invasion might be, and how dangerous and high risk that might be. We saw.
Well, don't you think that the Chinese military is significantly more capable than as it turns out? Just to pick up what Senator King was pressing you on,
yeah.
We pretty dramatically overestimated the strength of the Russian military. I'd be surprised, for one, if China's military strength proves to be so attenuated. So, I mean, don't you think that we're dealing with a significantly more formidable adversary in China?
I think China is a formidable adversary.
So, I mean, back to lessons learned, unfortunately, I think one lesson they can draw from the Ukraine conflict is the deterrence didn't work in Ukraine. I mean, Russia invaded Ukraine. I, for one, don't want to be having this conversation about Taiwan in any period of years, not next year, not in 5 years, not in 10 years. So my sense of urgency on this is we better figure out how deterrence is going to work in Taiwan, because if China is successful in a fait accompli, that's going to look a lot different than a Russian scenario in Ukraine. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
So just to that end, Director, let me come back to you. One of the things that the IC was able to give us lead time on was a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, we're very clear on that there was a strong likelihood of that, and you had that months in advance, actually. I'm curious if you think that we would get similar strategic warning about a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
I mean, it's too early to tell, honestly, whether or not that would be the case. And obviously, in a kind of classic intelligence way, we would sure as hell not, promise anything at this stage. So,
General, let me ask you about something that has long been a concern of mine, and even more so now, and that's what I think of as the simultaneity problem, simultaneous conflicts in Western Europe with Russia and with China. So do you worry that Beijing might see an opportunity to invade Taiwan in the very near future should the United States get drawn into an actual conflict, a kinetic conflict with Russia?
I think that's a remote possibility, but I don't.
Which part's remote?
The part that China would see that as a window to open to take advantage of that, based on the fact that they probably aren't ready to do that right now.
So you don't think they have the capacity right now to invade Taiwan?
I didn't say that. I think.
Well, I'm trying to drill down on what you mean when you say that they wouldn't do it.
I think they probably have. Actually, could we take this into a closed session?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And my time's expired, so I'll take it up with you then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Manchin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, just real quickly back on Taiwan again. Do you believe Taiwan is prepared to defend itself? Now, your evaluation of what Taiwan's been doing, the only thing I keep seeing, they want more F-16s, and we think they're going to be able to go to air war with China and defend Taiwan. I don't think so.
I think Taiwan could do more, sir.
Are you all strategically giving them different things that they can use, whether it be in the sea or on land, to protect their island?
I think they're in close consultation with our partners in Indo-PACOM and within the Department of Defense.
Mm-hmm. How about Ukraine? Can Ukraine win now that we've, as Senator King so rightfully pointed out and Senator Hawley followed up on, we misread that one. Are we reading it now they have the ability to win if we continue to support without us being pulled into a land war with them on their own? Can they win?
I think that is a difficult prediction to make. Right now, I think where the agency is at is a prolonged stalemate should no factor change on either side. In other words, the Russians continue to do what they're doing, and we continue to do what we're doing for the Ukrainians. I see that as a stalemate, not
Director
necessarily.
Haines, how do you evaluate this? I'm sure you've been kept up to speed on this and evaluating them. My other concerns you might want to answer is our ability to maintain and manufacture the weapons that are needed to not only help Ukraine, not only to backfill our allies, but also keep our own supply chains up. Are we running critically low? Could it be that we could put ourselves in a dangerous situation?
Thank you, Senator. So I think a few things. One is just taking your last question first. Something we can do maybe a little bit in closed session is talk about not just our military assistance to Ukraine, but also a number of other countries that have provided military assistance to Ukraine.
Wait for me to ask the questions. Are you concerned about the ability to have the supplies that are needed for us, for our allies, and what Ukraine is going to need to sustain and hopefully win this war?
So that's why I was talking about the allies piece. No, I'm not concerned, because I think, frankly, between all of us, there is the capacity to provide the kind of assistance that they're asking for.
Okay, and as you identify, can you identify other hotspots we're very much concerned about? And I'll give you, other than China, because we know China's challenges we have. Other hotspots that we're worried about could stem up or rise up during this very difficult time and the geopolitical unrest that we have in the world. Where would you, in Iran, North Korea, some of the ones you're more watching and concerned about?
The agency's worried about North Korea for sure, and their ballistic missile development timeline, and as well as potential nuclear testing. We're always thinking about Iran and the actions that they have to pull malign influence within the region against our neighbors, and certainly U.S. forces there. Always thinking through how to sustain partnerships to be able to keep a beat on these threats.
Director Haines, are you concerned about basically the tensions that we have with UAE and with Saudis, and also their more visual movements, intentional movements towards China for support, or basically the yuan being used now as the currency that they're accepting for payment of energy? Things of this sort that could also put us in a more precarious situation with UAE and Saudis.
Thank you, Senator. I think, obviously, as you indicate, we are always looking at efforts that both China and Russia make to try to make inroads with partners of ours across the world, and UAE and Saudi Arabia are examples of that in both respects.
Cybersecurity is my final one for you all. Cyber, right now, seems like it'd be just a convoluted area where people would report whether it's private companies in America that are getting hacked and what's going on, but also who is in charge, where do they go, what is the chain right now within the federal government and military especially on cyber that you would consider the premier spot that we should be working with? Or are we putting things together? Are we still so fragmented throughout our agencies?
In my experience, it's gotten better over the years. I would never say it's perfect. It is one of those things that continues to be worked through, but there's a very clear chain of command with respect to taking action.
Who's taking the lead? Who takes the lead?
So when it comes to offensive cyber operations to defend the country, obviously the Department of Defense does so. When it comes to defending, helping to defend infrastructure and critical, resilience, it's Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, and it's and everybody has a role to play, and we obviously support in the intelligence community all of them in the work that they're doing.
How about the national cybersecurity? How about the center? How do you all evaluate the National Cybersecurity Center?
You mean the National Cybersecurity Director, the new position?
All the stakeholders are involved in that. That's why I'm saying the convoluted. Who's taking the lead? Who is the lead person? Who's the lead agency?
Yeah, CISA is the main.
How do you evaluate that?
I think they're doing very well. Yeah.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Manchin. Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for their hard work during a challenging time. I want to focus a lot on the issue of energy, and I'll relay a story I had with Senator McCain and a Russian dissident who's now been arrested, Vladimir Kara-Murza. He's in jail right now in Russia. About 4 years ago, I asked him what was the #1 thing we could do to undermine the corrupt Russian regime, to undermine Vladimir Putin. And he said, the #1 thing is easy, Senator, produce more American energy. Produce more American energy. So I want to talk a little bit about that. In your assessment, is energy independence, so a couple of years ago we were the largest producer of natural gas in the world, largest producer of oil in the world, largest producer of renewables in the world. Is that good for America's national security, General?
Senator, thanks for the question. As we have watched this conflict unfold, what we're seeing...
I got a lot of questions. I gave you a softball. Can you answer the question? Is that good for America's national security, to be energy independent in the world's energy superpower?
Certainly energy independence is a good thing.
How about you, Director?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the straightforward question, or answer. Now, in this conflict with Ukraine, what does our ability to produce energy do? How do the Russians view that? And how do our allies view that? And we all know Vladimir Putin uses energy as a weapon. How are you assessing the ability of the United States to fill the void that the Germans and others have with regard to getting energy from Russia to now get it from the United States? Is there a lot of interest in that, and is that a good thing for our national security? General?
I certainly believe that our European allies see this is a national security issue for sure, and they're thinking through new ways of developing and getting after their energy needs for sure.
How about getting some from the United States?
If the United States had excess capacity, I'm sure that would be something that they would welcome.
Do you see that, Director, similarly?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Let me ask, with regard to China, almost 70% of China's crude oil supply came in the form of imports. What is your assessment of how China's energy dependence could or would impact its military operations during a potential cross-strait conflict? In your assessment, when you read up on China's weaknesses, are they concerned about their energy dependence with regard to natural gas and oil being a major importer?
If there is a way we could take this into the closed session to discuss that, that would be better, Senator.
Okay.
But yes, I do believe they're concerned about their dependence on energy.
Director?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you see that as a strategic advantage we have in our great power competition with China and Russia, the fact that we can not only produce energy for our own country, and I'm talking all the above, renewables, oil, gas. Do you see that as a strategic advantage for our nation relative?
I see it as an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I think, frankly, our capacity to work with our allies on this issue has been a strategic advantage, and our ability to work with them in order to actually help to mitigate against Russia using energy as a weapon has been a major issue.
And China's dependence on energy, should there be some kind of conflict between us and China?
Yes, I think it will be, their relationship with Russia will be relevant under those circumstances, obviously.
Let me ask one final question. It's not really a question on Intel, but, you know, we're getting ready to vote here on a $40 billion package. My team and I are looking through it. It's a lot. How do you assess our NATO partners' commitment, finally, to hitting 2% GDP, 2% of their GDP for their annual military budgets? I mean, we have now 100,000 troops over in Europe. I fully support what the President has been doing in that regard. But if there was ever a time that countries had to kind of wake up and say, you know what, for 40 years, we've promised to hit 2%, the wolf's at the door, or maybe the bear's at the door, or the dragon's at the door, or whatever metaphor you want. Are you seeing a shift? Because the Germans made a big announcement. My understanding is Canada still won't even hit 1% of GDP for their defense budget. Are you seeing a shift in our NATO allies to say, you know what, it's time for us to pull our own weight here? The Americans are doing it once again. And look, I support everything we're doing, but you know, 40 billion, that's a lot of money. My constituents got a lot of needs too, right? And we still have NATO allies, Canada one, who just freeload. And it's getting a little tiring. What's your assessment of our NATO partners' commitment to finally hitting 2% now that it's very clear that there's a brutal dictator on their doorstep?
I think we've seen, obviously, as you indicated in the opening to your question, that just a number of countries now announce an increase in their defense budget, and I think that is something that we're going to see them follow through on, at least in part.
General,
and I think it's had this has had a galvanizing effect on our NATO partners, and I think most of them will come around.
Thank you. And again, I didn't start by saying the intel that you were providing us and everybody else prior to the war was exceptional, and the intel ops that you did were also really impressive. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Haines, the 2022 annual threat assessment states, quote, that China presents the broadest, most active, and persistent cyber espionage threat to the U.S. government and private sector networks, end of quote. The assessment specifically discusses the capacity for China to conduct surveillance as well as disrupt critical infrastructure. My question for you, ma'am, is does the ODNI believe that China would use their cyber capacity to shape other countries' decisions, such as the Russians are known to do? Do you believe that that's in the cards as well?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I mean, I think in the sense that, in particular, our assessment is that China is pursuing significant cyber capabilities in this area, in particular, to deter the United States from taking action in the event of a conflict, for example, in their region.
Thank you. Media coverage during the weeks leading up to Russia's invasion often used open source evidence to support the administration's intelligence estimates. Examples here range from images provided by Maxar's commercial satellite network to Russian military communications that were intercepted by tech-savvy civilians. My question for you, General Berrier, is how is the proliferation of technology and information accessibility for average citizens impacting the realm of professional intelligence work within your agency?
From the perspective of this war between Russia and Ukraine, the plethora of open source data that's available to enrich our assessments has been amazing. Just think of the third-party damage assessment work that's happening right now using images, because most Ukrainian citizens have a cell phone. It's been really rich, and then you combine it with the other open source data that's available and publicly available and can be purchased. For us, it's been enlightening and will probably shape how we do intelligence operations and analysis going forward in the future. We just have to be careful that we use the right rules at the right time to make sure that we're safeguarding the information and that we're not violating any laws or policies.
Yeah, so that actually leads to the next question, and you mentioned you're looking at how you integrate that into how you collect information. Is there anything that Congress should be doing to help you better enable your abilities to harness the potential for open source information?
I think we're budgeted for it, Senator, and we're looking forward to the work ahead as we go forward on this issue.
Good. Director Haines, the Biden administration has done an admirable job, certainly, of crafting a coalition of nations to impose sanctions, enforce export controls against Russia for their illegal invasion. This includes our transatlantic partners, many of them who are now giving up on Russian hydrocarbons, something that I think we all would have thought was absolutely unthinkable just a short while ago, as well as our global partners, Japan and Taiwan, actively engaged. What has been noticeable, though, is to see that much of the world is still not with us. They may not be with Russia. I'm not saying they're with Russia, but they're not subscribing to our call for a global coalition of democracies to stand against Ukraine. This includes India, Indonesia, Nigeria, South Africa, and particularly other nations in the global south, in which the U.S. certainly has very friendly relations with, but we have not yet been able to get them to join the Ukrainian cause. As the U.S. will need to certainly build even more robust coalition of nations in the future to counter potential Chinese aggression, I believe it's imperative that the U.S. understand how to win over these non-aligned nations living certainly in a multipolar world. So my question to you, in your view, what steps should the U.S. take to build a broader coalition for potential future conflicts similar to what we're seeing right now?
Thank you, Senator. So from the intelligence community perspective, we've done a lot of thinking about how we can help to facilitate, frankly, the policy community in this area, to your point. And one of the things that we did in the context of Ukraine that I think is possible for us to do in other areas and that we've discussed with the policy community about is basically working with key allies and partners who are influencers, in effect, within specific regions to try to get out to them as much intelligence as we can, obviously being mindful of sources and methods, but just to lay the groundwork so that then the policy community can work with those countries to effectively provide for the kind of coalition that you describe. And I do think it's an absolutely fundamental piece. I mean, the fact that the UN General Assembly managed to garner 141 votes, I think it was, against Russia on the Russia-Ukraine piece was pretty extraordinary. And I do think that our capacity to share intelligence in advance of that moment was critical to getting that kind of coalition together. And I hope we can do that in the future.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Rosen, please.
Thank you, Chairman Reed, and really appreciate the witnesses. I appreciate you both for being here today and for your service. Director Haines and General Berrier, given that the annual threat assessment was written before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has Russia's loss and expenditure of military equipment, personnel, and resources in Ukraine, coupled with their, frankly, poor performance, changed our overall threat of Russia and their military capabilities? And like I said, this was written before that. How do you assess we may need to adjust our planning going forward, seeing as what we're learning?
I'll start with that one, Senator. I think, as we've watched the Russians falter here and the losses that they've sustained, we believe that they're going to be set back conventionally for a number of years as they try to recoup these losses and replace all of the equipment and soldiers that they have lost. So I think we should back up our assessment really for NATO and what that threat really looks like, also factoring in their nuclear capabilities and what that means for NATO going forward.
So I'll just add to this. I think, as we talked to the analysts about this, and obviously before each of the threat hearings we discussed this, because the threat hearings came after the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and as you indicate, the assessment was done beforehand. And I think the overall threat level is not so much changed as it is, the question of how it's evolving, to General Berrier's point. I mean, I think our view is that the ground combat forces have been degraded considerably. It's going to take them years to basically manage to the extent that they're able to rebuild that, in effect. And that may end up meaning that they have greater reliance, in effect, on asymmetric tools during this period. So they may rely more on things like cyber, nuclear, precision, et cetera. And that's obviously a shift in the way in which they are exercising their efforts for influence and so on.
Well, and knowing that, we also know, to everyone else's point here too, that the world is watching. So Director Haines, how do you assess the threat level to Taiwan? Is it increased? Does China feel more emboldened now that Russia has invaded Ukraine? And then I will just give the second part of that to you, General. Does China see this as an opportunity, maybe this period, to invade Ukraine, as we might be distracted, the world might be distracted with the Ukraine crisis?
Thank you, Senator. So it's hard to tell, honestly, at this stage. What we see is that China is evaluating what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. They are still evaluating. The crisis obviously continues. So what lessons they learned during this period is not really, concluded yet. And so it's a little harder to tell whether or not it's an increased threat of their, accelerating their efforts towards Taiwan or less so. I would say that thus far we have not, the IC has not assessed that the Russia-Ukraine crisis is likely to accelerate their plan vis-a-vis Taiwan. And the kinds of lessons that, that we think are possible that are relevant, just to give you maybe two. One is they were surprised by the degree to which the United States and Europe came together to enact sanctions, and that is something obviously that they're going to be looking at in the context of Taiwan. And the second one, I think, is this point that really General Berrier made earlier a little bit, which is to say that one of the issues for them is the confidence they have that they are able militarily to take action in Taiwan over our intervention. That will play into their decision-making over time. We think at seeing what happened in Russia, that may give them less confidence in some respects over what it is that's likely to happen.
Senator, the only thing that I would add is on a day-to-day basis with Chinese military activity, I'm not seeing anything that would tell me that they're thinking about trying to take advantage of this time that they think that they might have.
But let me ask one additional follow-up on that. What's your assessment of our ability to conduct military operations in both theaters should something occur?
We have significant capabilities in both theaters. It would depend what the variables were with each situation and what that meant, but that's why we have 4-star combatant commanders in USUCOM and INDOPACOM.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Rosen. And thank you, Madam Director and General. We have a vote scheduled at 11:45. We will reconvene in SVC 217 for the classified session at noon, 12 o'clock. And at this point, I will recess or adjourn the open session. Thank you very much.